As South Africans begin to feel the impact of the coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, the situation prompted an extraordinary address by President Cyril Ramaphosa on Sunday. Following the president's address, cabinet ministers held a media conference to brief the nation on strategies adopted to try and mitigate the impact of the virus. The labour sector, as a contributor in driving the economy, is likely to suffer the most, with the impact expressed through the performance of the economy. Individuals, households and communities. Now, the National Economic Development and Labour Council, Nedlac, met with some of their partners yesterday to come up with commitments needed as a response to the situation. Thulas Nxesi, the Minister of Employment and Labour, joins us from our SABC studios in Hatfield for a little bit of clarity on government's approach in dealing with the labour industry in the context of COVID-19. Minister, great to have you on the show. Thanks very much for being our guest.
Thank you. Good morning, Leanne.
You know, it's obviously a very difficult time for the whole world, not only just South Africa, but if we look at South Africa, this is particularly a tough one with labour, our economy not looking great at all. What proposals came up at Nedlac?
Well, in support of the President's call, the leaders of Nedlac, which is organized business, organized labour, and communities, met with the government ministers and they committed themselves to save the lives and save the economy, and agreed that we must all invest in the health and safety of the workers. We agreed on cooperation, collaboration, and common action in about 6 areas. And the 6 areas relate to, we said, we need to enhance the public health response. We need to talk about containing the virus, the issue of security of health suppliers and medical equipment. The 4th area was workplace adaptation. And 5thly, we talked about the support to workers and companies who are negatively impacted by the virus. So we agreed on those areas.
I mean, it certainly is one of the toughest times for the worker at this point. I mean, the impact on the employer directly affects families, it affects communities. From the labour side, you say that there will be some specific initiatives that you will implement to try and curb the spread of the virus. Let's begin there. What are you implementing? What is going to become compulsory in some workplaces?
We think that the issues of health and safety, which are in the regulations, and the issues of the hazardous substances, and during this time of disease, there are very clear regulations which must be respected by all the workers. This includes the issues of the right equipment, the issues of the protective equipment for the workers, and we expect therefore all the employers to comply in relation to that. There are very clear procedures which they have to follow in terms of health and safety, but also we have agreed that the issue of tracing and testing the workers who might have been in contact with people with the virus, it has to be encouraged. We have to put the measures at workplaces which can be able to help, but we are not forcing the employers. They must use the public institutions, but where they can afford, they must also invest and put their own initiatives to be able to do that. We know that the workers can converge into those places in big numbers than going into the clinics. So there are a number of initiatives which we're expecting from the employers.
You know, we heard from the President that any gathering of over 100 people is not allowed, and that becomes a bit of a threat. Now, there are many business places and workplaces in South Africa where many more than 100 people converge any given day to work in an environment that, as you say, needs to adhere to some health standards. But what happens in a case like that? Because this is sort of a bit of a blurred line.
We've agreed, Leanne, that this cannot be taken as working as usual. And there needs to be what we call workplace adaptation. And workplace adaptation can take different forms. It can take the form of organizing shift work, relooking at the working hours, and that means changing the hours of work, talking short time. It can talk about reducing the breaks, but also it says what we know at the workplaces, as much as there will be 2,000 people in such a particular company, but they do not gather together and congregate to work in that particular area. Normally we are saying they need to be divided. Some people are working in the offices and so on, but in a workstation, obviously there must not be more than 100. But it depends on how they are going to do that reorganization of the work. We've requested the leadership of the unions of the workers together with the leadership of the companies. They would need to come together and adapt the situations as per these guidelines.
Yeah, indeed. And this is a big adaptation, because at the same time, it is a right of an employer to pay their workers, and to also, an employee is now in a difficult situation because they don't want to lose shifts because of something like this. Now, I know that was spoken about as well at the meeting and going forward for Labour. How do we mitigate these difficult times where some workers are not now going to be paid because they have to stay away from work?
Leanne, we've agreed that there's a need for support to workers and companies who are negatively impacted or distressed by this particular virus. We've acknowledged that the economic sectors, especially the small and the medium enterprises, are going to be heavily affected by this. And also some of the workers. In cases where the workers have been affected or they are infected, we have agreed that there are various leaves in the regulations which must be used. It can be the normal leave, it can be the sick leave. But if there's a need for special leave, we will have to look into that. If it goes beyond the 14 days, we have to come up to the party also as the department with our UIF and the compensation fund. But it must be case by case, because we must not open for a lot of opportunists who can abuse this thing. But we have to come up, and we are saying this is unprecedented. It needs unprecedented response. Hence, we are opening our UIF and the compensation fund that the workers can be able to claim from that if it happens that they get sick for longer periods. But also for the companies, we will look into the issue of if they have to shut down, how do we help the workers for a particular short period in order not to lose their income. So all those issues we've discussed, and we've requested all the sectors. For instance, in mining, in agriculture, Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development, Minister Togoti Tiza, has already met with the employers who are saying the same meetings should take place to look into these specifics at the different workplace to be able to adapt into the different sectors. And we think that we are going to be able to respond positively.
Yeah. Obviously, we know that the Economic Affairs Minister, Abraham Patel, was present. He must have given a lot of insights into government's assistance. And one thing that we have been seeing from other countries like the US and in European countries as well as China, there have been some stimulus packages from government to assist businesses at this time. This is obviously something that's been discussed from the South African point of view.
Well, in relation to the stimulus packages at this place, both the Minister of Trade and Industry and Compensation, together with the Minister of Finance, they are still going to sit and talk about the measures which they can be able to put in place. However, the issue which came very strongly was how do we deal with the security of the health supplies and the medical equipment, where we've agreed that issues such as hand sanitizers, protective equipment for health professionals, and stocks for testing and treatment, as well as ARVs, are going to be very important. And the partners agreed that we need to track, support, and address the constraints of the importation, manufacturing, and the distribution of those materials. They seem to be very, very important in this particular period. However, the ministers are going to come back as we do the assessment from time to time.
So the stimulus package, I'll just ask you again on that one. Has there been any movement on that for stimulus packages from government to assist businesses at this time? Or is that still under discussion?
It's under discussions. The ministers are going to make an announcement.
Okay, we'll wait on that one. Part of the proposal at Nedlac is that there needs to be a response team. What would this team do?
Well, the rapid response team, which has been proposed, and it's going to be interacting or linking up with a national team, which is led by the Ministry of Health. But that national response team will be looking at the work-related areas, monitoring if people are implementing what has been agreed upon. But these, you see, the national response team cannot be able to be in every workplace. The actual campaigns must be at the workplace level, and therefore we expect that at that particular level at the workplace, we will have the smaller teams working together and also linking up with the national response team and monitoring as issues develop over time.
I'm reading a couple of the outcomes from the meeting, and this is further to what we've already discussed, and I see that other urgent interventions that have been proposed are the adoption of short time as an alternative to retrenchments arising from significantly reduced economic activities. Amendments are also to be introduced to the UIF Act to allow for any shortfall in workers' wages to be claimable from the UIF. Is this still to be implemented? Are these things that are being worked on right now that is going to be facilitated if the situation gets worse and out of hand?
These are already in the regulations.
Okay.
These are measures which were already there. When we're dealing with the mass retrenchments, even before there was this outbreak, we're already implementing these. There's something which we call temporal employers employee relief scheme. It's already there. We're going to use those schemes. But if it happens that there are measures which are extraordinary beyond our control, we might have to approach the president for the special proclamation.
Another interesting one I'm reading is the immediate tax and loan relief, particularly for SMMEs. Urgent reprioritization of funds from the non-critical or underperforming programs to be redirected to fund this and provide loan guarantees. That's something that SMMEs would be very, very, I suppose, welcoming of at this point in time, is these lower rates. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, the loan relief and immediate tax relief?
These are some of the proposals which were put by some of the partners. But we have agreed that let's go into the areas which are not going to lead into us having debates and discussions and controversies and disagreement. Let's talk about a minimum program on areas where we agree. There are a number of areas we might not be able to agree quickly. We will have to put them into processes. We need the ministries of finance. We need trade and industry, as you are saying, to start hard negotiations. This is not the time for such hard negotiations. It's just the time for implementation of the common action, and we will have to do it very speedily. Some of those areas might be looked into later on.
Yeah. Minister, a very important issue is the impending impasse on salary freezes announced by government, which of course invoked the anger of labour unions. And this is coming up. This is just in 2 weeks' time. It'll be in April. What is going to happen now? Because this is a big issue to deal with.
Well, unfortunately, at this particular stage, I cannot be able to comment on this matter. This is a matter which is led by Minister Mkono, the Minister of Public Service and Administration. However, we are not saying that there is a shutdown. If there's need to be discussion, and those discussions have been continuing, we've not come to any particular deadlock. And we must allow for those discussions, and we will see what comes out of that. But for now, The issue of this outbreak, it's a matter of life and death. Let's all focus on it without neglecting the other issues. But there will be processes which are engaged. If there is any dispute, there are dispute resolving mechanisms which are in the Labor Relations Act and the structures. But for now, the issue, the urgency, it's for all of us to focus on this one.
It certainly is, but are the unions feeling the same way as you're feeling? Because they're fighting for the rights of the workers and, seeing reneging on a deal that was already in place is going to cause a big problem. Obviously, this was before the advent of the pandemic now.
I'm not sure, Leanne, if there's any reneging on a deal. Any party in any agreement has a right to propose a review of an agreement, has a right to do that. But thus far, there's not been any reneging. Negotiations are continuing. There are different proposals. I don't know where this reneging is coming from.
Minister, before I let you go, I just need to ask you in terms of the finance minister said that government had funds immediately available in the National Disaster Fund. How will these funds be allocated and how much are we talking about here? Are you privy to that information?
Unfortunately, I'm not, but the minister has been able to declare that the reserve fund might not necessarily be enough for this particular purpose. And all of us, we have to accept that there might be tampering with our programs. There might be cuts. All of us as the different departments, that's what he communicated, and we must be ready for that if we are serious about dealing with this national or international disaster. So I think later on he would be able to give details to that.
All right, Minister, we will leave it there, but we thank you for your time. Thanks for talking to us. That was our Minister, Thulas Nxesi. He, of course, is in charge of our labour, the employment and labour, talking to us about government's response to COVID-19 in relation to labour and the industry that, of course, is an important strategic contributor to drive the economy. Well, the time now is 7 o'clock. Let's cross over to Sakina for the latest.